Welcome to Nice and Blunt. I'm Adam Mariancho, and these are my running back rankings for Week 6. They're intended for half PPR. If you have any other scoring settings, let me know in your questions below. But before we get going, there are some players on bye that I did not rank. We have Jordan Mason and Xavier Scott of the Vikings, as well as Nick Chubb and Woody Marks of the Texans. Only 2 teams on bye this week. We do get off a bit lightly in Week 6. But there's also some players unranked due to injury. We know about Joe Mixon, Aaron Jones, Eckler, Najee, and James Conner. They've been out for a while. But Braylon Allen was placed on IR last week. Bucky Irving didn't play. I did not rank him for this matchup either. And then Trey Benson is on IR. Chuba didn't play last week. I don't know what his status is, so I did not rank him either. And then lastly, Omarion Hampton was placed on IR, will miss at least 4 weeks with an ankle injury. That is sad to see. So those running backs are unranked. And before we get into all of the rankings, I would like to bring up the matchups this week. Back to the charts as always. In blue, we have total points per game allowed. And then in red, this week, we're going with total yards per game allowed. The last 2 weeks, we've shown you touchdown production by each defense, as well as rushing yards per game. Let's focus on every yard to speak of, not just rushing, but receiving as well. And there are some clear trends with total yards per game allowed. Obviously, the best matchups are more likely to give you the most yards overall. And number 1 would be Miami in that stat, 183 yards from scrimmage combined every week. But as you can see, the gap between yardage and points is pretty slim. And the gap between red and blue mainly indicates how many points are coming off of touchdowns as well. So as you can see, the Dolphins maybe don't give up a ton of touchdown production to running backs, but so much yardage that it still makes them a very good matchup. But at the top of this chart, we have 4 defenses that are clearly the best spots to be up against. And not only did they give up at least 150 yards from scrimmage apiece, but also plenty of touchdowns. Number 1 this week is Cincinnati. That means Josh Jacobs is going to dominate on Sunday. He gets a bye week to prepare. He's going to crush against the Bengals. The Chicago Bears have also been terrible against running back production. So JCM, after torching the Chargers, a much more difficult matchup, should be lights out, go over 100 yards again against Chicago. The Titans have also been atrocious at stopping fantasy running backs. It could have been even worse had Emari Demercado not fumbled through the end zone. So a top 3 matchup this week for Ashton Jeanty. I think he has a similar breakout game like he did in Week 4. Maybe not 3 touchdowns, but still you should be starting Ashton Jeanty this week with confidence. At number 4, the last in this tier would be Baltimore, who've been terrible on defense across the board. Kyren Williams will be a must-start against Baltimore. Blake Corum seems to be in the doghouse after that fumble. But Miami, we mentioned, are the 5th best matchup. A bit of a drop-off from the top 4, but still well above the rest. And the Dolphins are going up against the Chargers. So Hassan, Haskins, Kimani Vidal vying for the starting running back job as Hampton goes on IR. Don't know if you trust the Chargers backfield, but if you are in a pinch, if you do have to pick up one off the waiver wire, it's possible they do go off against the Dolphins. There's 183 yards from scrimmage allowed per game by Miami to opposing running backs. Dallas has also been pretty brutal in terms of defense, so Rico Dowdle would have an excellent revenge game if Chuba Hubbard is not the starter. 151 yards from scrimmage allowed, does rank top 6 against the position. So we'll see who's the starter, but if Rico's the guy after last week, you got to feel confident starting him at over 200 yards against Miami. And then Philadelphia has also been way less effective at stopping running backs this season. They had an elite defense last year, but this year it's a top 7 matchup. So on paper, Cam Skattebo does get an upgrade, but Tyrone Tracy has been practicing since Friday, and it's a Thursday game. I think Tracy will suit up. So that's interesting, kind of an upgrade, but also a downgrade because of the committee. And then lastly, in the same game on Thursday, the Giants have ranked top 8 against the position, giving up 21.9 points per game. So Saquon should play well against his former team. The revenge narrative, I doubt you're benching Saquon against the Giants. I'll ignore the rest. Less than 22 points is kind of in the average tier, and most defenses are kind of the same beyond that point. But on the opposite end of this chart, there are clearly 3 defenses that are much more difficult than anyone else. And this bottom 3 tier would be Cleveland as the toughest spot. So the Steelers this week with Jaylen Warren and Kenny Gainwell are not getting an upgrade. That's a tough spot for everyone against the Browns. Jordan Mason did find the end zone, but he also fumbled, didn't have an elite performance against the Browns. So maybe it's a committee. If Warren is inactive, then Gainwell should have a very safe floor, but the ceiling, I think, will be capped against Cleveland. As you can see on the other end of this chart, the yardage is way, way lower than at the top of this chart, and most defenses at this point give up under 100 yards from scrimmage allowed. The Browns are the worst, allowing 77 total yards per game on average. That is definitely the least in the NFL. So I'm not sure I fully trust Jaylen Warren this week, especially if he's not 100%. And then Atlanta is also a big downgrade. They get the Bills this week. So you're still going to start James Cook. Let's not get cute, but expect a diminished return. It might be as tough as the Patriots were last week. The Patriots rank bottom 5 on this chart as well, and the Falcons are bottom 2. Cook might have a rough stretch here, could have a rough game against the Falcons. Not a good spot. Not at all. The third toughest spot would be the LA Rams, who did surrender a touchdown to McCaffrey last week, but before that had not given up a single running back touchdown. And McCaffrey is an elite player to go against. Definitely skews these numbers a little bit higher. If anything, I view the Rams as an even more difficult matchup than bottom 3. I think they are actually the worst matchup you could find against the running back position. So this week, Derrick Henry is even less trustworthy. I would not feel confident starting Derrick Henry. Last week, he scored a touchdown and still didn't crack 10 points. No way I'm starting Derrick Henry against the Rams. The Packers are in the next tier, but the 4th toughest matchup this season. Coming off the bye, I'm definitely worried about it. Against Chase Brown, that's definitely not a player you're trusting right now. So no chance I'm starting Chase Brown either. And then the Patriots just locked up James Cook. So Alvin Kamara in more of a committee these days with Kendre Miller, not a safe play. And then the Chargers did just get torched by JCM, but on the season are still a tough spot for Devon Achane here. Maybe not as bad. Last week was pretty atrocious. They gave up over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns to Bill Croskey-Merritt, 7th round pick. So maybe you are downgrading Achane, but in general, not that much. And then the Colts have also been pretty tough. So Michael Carter, kind of a tough spot for him. I don't trust Amari DiMercado. And then last 2 I want to mention would be Detroit, who give up only 95 total yards from scrimmage to the position this season. The committee between Kareem Hunt and Isiah Pacheco is rather touchdown dependent. I'm not too confident starting a Chiefs running back. And then although the Texans also rank bottom 10, they are on bye this week. So the last downgrade I would like to bring up is actually in the middle of this chart. And you can see with the red stat is it is the only remaining defense allowing under 100 yards from scrimmage per week. That would be the Las Vegas Raiders, who did just give up 3 touchdowns to Jonathan Taylor and then a 4th to Amir Abdullah in a revenge game. So I think the Raiders are actually much more difficult than last week's matchup would have suggested. If you remove the Colts game, then they would fall down much closer to the bottom half of this chart. So I think the Raiders, even though they're middle of the pack, not a good spot here for Tony Pollard and Tyjae Spears of the Titans. I do consider the Raiders a bad matchup, but they're also just so bad against the pass that also disincentivizes using the running back in general. So they're a bit of an outlier on this chart, should probably be much further on the right, but because of all the touchdowns, they are smack dab in the middle. So that's it for the matchup previews. Let's get back to the rankings. And we're starting at the top with Jonathan Taylor of the Colts. He's getting the Cardinals this week, not an elite matchup, not a downgrade either. He's the running back 1 in fantasy, and I got to show him respect. He had 3 touchdowns last week, and if you told me he dropped a house call from anywhere on the field, wouldn't be shocked. It can literally happen at any moment with Jonathan Taylor. So he's my favorite play this week, definitely the number 1 running back in fantasy so far. At number 2, Coming off a bye, I got Bijan Robinson versus Buffalo, and Bijan is putting up the most yards per game among all active running backs. He's definitely rested and good to go, and the Bills are actually a pretty shaky defense against the run. They've been pretty vulnerable, just gave up 2 touchdowns to Rhamondre Stevenson, and the last time we saw Bijan in prime time, they showcased him, they kept the Vikings off the field. Even though he didn't score a touchdown, he was dominant. Bijan is elite, likely going to be a shootout versus the Bills, and I expect him to crush yet again. Bijan, I think, is at worst going to be ranked as like RB4 rest of season, and I think he's actually my preferred RB1 the rest of the year than Jonathan Taylor. I think they're both elite, but Taylor has actually had a little bit more injury risk in his career. I think Bijan's slightly more likely to stay healthy, and then he's also past his bye week. That is an advantage to have. 1 fewer game, he'll be inactive. So Bijan at number 2, got to start him. That's pretty obvious. And then at number 3 in this tier, I'm bumping up Josh Jacobs of the Packers versus the Bengals. The Cincinnati Bengals are the number 1 matchup for running backs in fantasy, allowing just shy of 29 fantasy points per game, 122 rushing yards per game, 45 receiving yards per game, plus they're one of only 4 teams allowing more than a touchdown and a half on average per week. So we know that Josh Jacobs has a clear role on the goal line. I think that's unquestioned. He is a lock to score a touchdown, if not 2, this week against the Bengals. I love Josh Jacobs, the best matchup you can find, and he's definitely the workhorse. Give me Jacobs as a top 3 play in week 6. At number 4, in this elite tier, we have Christian McCaffrey at Tampa Bay. But if you look at the Tampa Bay Bucks, they're actually elite at stopping the run. Although they don't rank as a bottom 8 matchup yet, they're only allowing 68 rushing yards per game on just 3.6 yards per carry. So even though Charbonnet found the end zone last week, Walker didn't have a great fantasy game, and because it's not a committee in San Francisco, you have no concerns, but it is a rough spot to run against the Tampa Bay Bucks. League average is about 90 yards per game. On the ground, they give up only 68 rushing yards per game. So that is not a good spot, but where I'm not worried, where I'm still obviously starting CMC, is because of his passing game usage. CMC is a top 10 wide receiver if you only count his receiving stats. So on top of that, he gets the rushing value, and the Bucks, even though they're great at stopping the run, actually allow 51 receiving yards per game. They are terrible against pass-catching running backs. So on paper, it's a bad matchup on the ground, but because he's basically a receiver, McCaffrey has to be in your lineup. He's at number 4 because the matchup's just so good for Jacobs, but every week, McCaffrey is top 5. So that's the last player in this tier. Now we're dropping down a slight tier break, but still definitely must starts. These are clear RB1s in fantasy this week. At number 5, I think Ashton Jeanty will fucking crush against the Titans. They are a top 3 matchup, and this is similar to that Bears game where he gets one of the best matchups you can find on paper. So love this spot for Ashton Jeanty. The Titans allow 5.2 yards per carry, as well as 1.8 touchdowns per game. I think Jeanty will score multiple touchdowns in this matchup. I don't worry about anyone behind him. Raheem Mostert is an afterthought, and especially without Brock Bowers, if he misses another matchup, then Jeanty will probably catch like 5 receptions as well. The volume's going to be elite. They have to keep the ball out of Geno Smith's hands. He can turn over the game, and as much as possible, they will funnel it to Ashton Jeanty. He's going to dominate the Titans just like he did against the Bears. Jeanty is a top 5 play against Tennessee. You have to start Ashton Jeanty. I think he's going to be better than Jahmyr Gibbs this week, but you can never bench Jahmyr Gibbs. He just moves down because I like some other guys a bit more, like Jacobs and Jeanty. When Montgomery was healthy last season, Gibbs was actually more like the running back 8 in fantasy on average. So last week, we still had a very productive floor from Gibbs, but Montgomery was showcased. He's from Cincinnati. He had a lot of family in the stadium. It made sense why they gave him the rock against such a bad team like the Bengals. It's kind of like when the Broncos showcased RJ Harvey on Monday night. Gibbs will get back in the end zone, and he even scored last week. He has an elite bust-proof floor. There's no chance you are benching Jahmyr Gibbs, but I prefer Jeanty's ceiling this week as well as Jacobs. I think they'll score multiple touchdowns. And Gibbs against the Chiefs does not get the easiest matchup. Last year, the Chiefs had a dominant run defense, and although they were kind of slow to start the year, last week they did shut down Travis Etienne to only 58 total yards. So the matchup's not amazing. Gibbs is still top 6. You're not benching him, but he's not in the top 5 like he normally is. At number 7, I have Kyren Williams at Baltimore, and the Ravens are one of those elite top 4 matchups we are clearly chasing. So definite upgrade for Kyren, and he cannot be benched, especially after last week. I apologize for my ranking on Kyren last week. I was worried about the Blake Corum usage, and then I also did not look too deep into his division stats against San Francisco. Now, after last week, Kyren has 7 touchdowns against the Niners in his last 4 games versus them, and I really underestimated his upside. So apologies on the rank on Kyren. I had him outside the top 10. I still told you to start him, but I definitely wasn't high enough on Kyren. If not for the Blake Corum fumble, though, I don't know what the usage split would have been, because they have been factoring in Blake Corum a lot more lately. And before the fumble, Corum had like a 13-yard rush attempt. I think he looked decent before the fumble, but the fumble put him in the doghouse. It was just the Kyren Williams show beyond that point. And even though Kyren fumbled himself, they kept going to him. They did not move off of Kyren. So I was a bit shocked by his usage. The fumble from Corum definitely played a role, but it was really just the passing game volume that was like such a surprise. 10 targets, 8 catches, 66 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns for Kyren. That's kind of unheard of for him. So he's definitely an elite player. I definitely trust him after they put Blake Corum in the doghouse. I would trust that Kyren's role is on lock moving forward. They also get extra rest for this Ravens game, and it's such a good matchup. I would trust that Kyren is an elite play. So he's a must start. The Blake Corum concerns are at least gone for now, and I expect them not to come back until after the Week 8 bye. I think this road trip to Baltimore and then London, Kyren will clearly be the guy. I'm not worried about Blake Corum in the short term. So have to start him. That's really the only concern. Definitely a must start against the Ravens. Number 8, we got Javonte Williams at Carolina. Javonte has been the most valuable pick in fantasy this year. The Cowboys offense is a juggernaut with Dak Prescott. So while Lamb is out, Javonte's touchdown odds increase even higher than they already were. And he is one of the true workhorse running backs in the league. Miles Sanders wasn't contributing in the first place, and now he's out. So his backup, Jaden Blue, had been a healthy scratch for the first 4 games. There is no competition for Javonte in terms of volume. It's just such a lock, especially on the goal line. It's a very safe bet to make. He's been a top 10 running back this season, and I need to keep ranking him like one. Clearly, a must start. At number 8, so long as Bucky Irving is unavailable, Rachaad White is a must start as well. Sean Tucker has some talent, but not enough to threaten Rachaad, especially in the passing game. That is such a safe bet to make, especially while Mike Evans remains out. So he's a top 3 target for Baker Mayfield every week moving forward, and I do not expect Bucky to be available in week 6. It sounds like a long shot with his foot injury. So I trust Rachaad White. He had 2 touchdowns last week, and when he was the starter before they drafted Bucky, he was a top 15 option in fantasy. He was averaging like 95 yards per game for like the last 10 weeks of 2023. Rachaad is a very safe floor play, and against San Francisco, this game could easily turn into a shootout. Shanahan's offense is always productive, and I do trust Rachaad as one of the best floor plays you can find. You cannot bench him. As long as Bucky is inactive, I got to rank him top 10. That's what he was last week. I will trust the usage. I've seen the ceiling, and I've seen the floor in this role for Rachaad White in the past. I know it's a safe bet. Give me Rachaad as a top 10 play. I think you are dropping down a slight tier, however, still in the must-start territory. We still have the top 15 running backs in this section, but there have been just some red flags overall, and even though they're not enough to bench, there is just like one minor concern. I don't have them in the same tier as Gibbs and Jeanty this week. It's just not the same thing. So even though Saquon is a lock in the lineup, I have him at RB10. I've been a little worried about his usage. The production just isn't really there from a yards per game standpoint it's pretty low. He's averaging less than 80 yards per game. Last year, it was over 120 on the ground, let alone his passing game usage. So I just don't think Saquon's as efficient this year. It's kind of inevitable. The Madden curse has always factored in. He had 2,000 yards last season. He played 19 games, including the Super Bowl. It's reasonable to understand why he fell off a little bit, but he has been an extremely high floor play as long as the touchdowns have been there. But if you remove the touchdowns, it's kind of gross. This is his game log. In 4 games, when he does score a touchdown, he's capped at less than 17 points. 16.4, 16.4, 15.4, and then last week, 16.3. In the one game where he didn't score a touchdown, he only had 7.5 half PPR points. So that's just not what you expected when you drafted him. You can't pretend like he's lived up to top 3 expectations. He's still very productive, but it's hyper reliant on touchdowns. If this wasn't a Giants matchup, I may not rank him in the top 10. There are some legit concerns. Last week, he only had 6 rush attempts for 30 rushing yards. The efficiency was there, 5 yards per carry, but the volume was not. That is not exciting, not encouraging. But they are playing on Thursday. Oftentimes, we see limited volume for running backs before they play on Thursday. And I do think, given his veteran status, his age factoring in, that may have been one of the reasons. But the Broncos defense is legit. They had a great game plan, really limited the Eagles offense. And part of it, I think, was just game plan specific. So I'm not going to panic. I'm still going to trust that the touchdowns hit for Barkley, but he hasn't gone over 16.5 points this season. And that's why I just can't give him like truly elite upside. Like, we've had some much better games from every running back I rank higher. Rachaad just fucking crushed, much better than Saquon's ceiling this season. So I just don't have him in that same tier. He's still top 10. You cannot bench him against his former team as well. The revenge narrative's a factor. You have to start him, but you just can't be as excited about Saquon. Compared to last year, he's not quite the same player. So not quite sure what the problem is, but it's mainly just efficiency. I think the volume will be fine. I trust the touchdown, but without it, you may not get 10 plus points. Not the safest bet with Saquon anymore. Number 11, I have Quinshon Judkins at Pittsburgh, and this is pretty interesting. Judkins and Saquon are actually tied for 14.4 points per game on average. Judkins did miss week 1, and then in week 2, he didn't operate as the workhorse. Since week 3, he's been one of the safest options in fantasy. Right now, he averages 14.4 points per game, which is tied with Barkley for RB11 on the season on average. So that's why I have to trust Judkins. He's putting up the same fantasy points as Saquon, and he's also doing it averaging 102 yards per game. Saquon is only averaging 79 yards per game. So Judkins is less touchdown dependent, and he's getting more of a workhorse role. Last week, he had 23 carries for 110 yards against the Vikings, a very good defense. He also added a catch for another 18 yards. So even without the touchdown, he was a must-start, very effective play last week, and I think the floor is going to be double digits every single week going forward, especially against the Steelers. I don't fear their defense that much. I think he can definitely find the end zone. With Dylan Gabriel under center, they're going to be running the ball even more. And Dylan Sampson is not a factor at all. Jerome Ford does get some usage, but definitely less than 10 touches per game. Last week it was like 8, I believe. And it is a factor, but to still have 24 touches for Judkins, this team uses the running back like crazy. So I trust the floor. I think he's extremely talented. And despite his character concerns, if you found your way into drafting him super cheap or even off the waiver wire like I did in my PPR league week 1, Judkins is a tremendous value, a potential fantasy league winner based on draft capital he was completely forgotten about after the suspension concern. So he's in your lineup if you have him. I think you're ecstatic about him. Let's see how long it lasts. Maybe he gets suspended, but until he does, he's a lock in the lineup. You cannot bench Quinshon Judkins. Just way too effective, way too talented to bet against. At 12, we have Devon Achane versus the Chargers, and Chargers are actually much less effective at stopping the run over the last 2 weeks. JCM just torched them for over 100 yards and 2 touchdowns. But on the season, they still rank as a bottom 6 matchup. So I'm not going to upgrade Achane, but I'm not going to pretend like you should bench him. There's just some slight hesitation, and they did just lose 2 in a row. I think their defense will step up against the Dolphins. But it is an early game window. They have to travel cross country. The Chargers defense might not play elite football. There are some question marks regarding their play on defense. So I'm not too worried about the matchup, although it is a downgrade on paper. That's why he's not in the top 10. But in general, you're always trusting Achane, especially in full PPR. I'd probably rank him above Saquon Barkley. I think he'll find the end zone, but he is a little touchdown dependent, similar to Saquon. If you do not score that touchdown, you're really dependent on all the passing game volume. But it never goes away with Tyreek Hill out. It's going to continue. Achane remains a must start. And even though this tier is outside the top 10, there's still must starts. Everyone in the top 15 is a lock in your lineup. I doubt you have enough depth where Achane is the 4th running back I've ranked on your team in this order. At 13, we have James Cook at Atlanta, and I brought it up earlier. The matchup against the Falcons is one of the worst you can find. I'm not panicking after last week's production, but I think it is a reminder James Cook is not matchup proof, and when he was in that elite tier, he was averaging the fewest yards of the top 4 up until last week. So with a rough game against the Patriots, he does drop down to 108 yards per game on average this season. He's still a lock in the lineup, but the Falcons are coming off a bye. They are the 2nd toughest matchup for opposing running backs, and they're one of only 2 teams in the NFL that allow less than 90 total yards per game to the position. So that's not a good spot. Definitely not an upgrade for Cook. If he gives you less than 80 yards again, I wouldn't be that surprised. And then the Falcons in 4 games have only given up 2 touchdowns to the running back position. So technically it's a 50-50 shot for him to find pay dirt, and I would trust it to happen, but because this matchup is just so bad on paper, it is a downgrade. I do have him dropping down a significant tier this week against Atlanta. It's just not a good matchup. And we did see there is the chance he gets shut down. The Patriots rank bottom 6, the Falcons rank bottom 2. So good luck with James Cook hitting that 25-point ceiling, but I think he's still going to give you at least 13, 14 points. He's a must start, definitely top 15. That's the worst case scenario in the rankings. This is probably the lowest rank I'll give you on Cook all year. At 14, we have Rico Dowdle versus Dallas, who I did rank at number 17 last week after Chuba went down. So if you did pick him up, I hope you started him. My only apology is not emphasizing enough how good of a waiver claim he was last Tuesday with Hubbard questionable. But I did tell you to start him if he was in your lineup. He balled out. He had over 200 yards against the Dolphins. And based on that production, he's probably a lock in the lineup this week. Against his former team, the Cowboys, in the revenge spot, I definitely want to start him again. The Cowboys rank as a top 6 matchup on the season. They allow 151 yards per game from scrimmage to opposing running backs, and 60 of that comes in the receiving game. Dowdle should go off in that department. And similar to the Dolphins, it's a top 5 matchup in terms of yards per game allowed. So if he goes over 150 yards, don't be shocked. Dowdle has that potential. And I also think he played really well for Dallas last year. It was kind of surprising that they moved off of him. I think he wants to prove why that was a mistake. Javonte looks good, but I think Dowdle might make them regret passing on him in free agency. I think as long as Chuba doesn't start, there's elite volume here, elite production from last week. I think he can handle a massive workload. He's proven it. I think he's a must start. The Cowboys matchup, definitely not one to worry about. So Dowdle at RB14 needs to be in the lineup for the 2nd week in a row. And then at 15, if you benched JCM last week, it made sense not to trust him, but boy, did he make you regret it. The committee was really annoying in the first 4 games for Washington, but Bill laid that to rest. He's clearly the guy moving forward. A breakout game against a really good run defense. They had ranked bottom 3 entering the week. So he just looked matchup proof, 2 touchdowns, and one of them was untouched. JCM looked phenomenal against a good run defense. So what can he do against a terrible run defense? I kind of want to rank him higher because Chicago is the second best matchup you can find. But to put him above James Cook, Devon Achane, Saquon, and Judkins, I don't know if I trust him that much. I'd like to see it just one more time before I consider him a top 12 running back. But at RB15, he's a lock in the lineup, definitely trusting him for at least 1 touchdown. Chicago gave up 3 touchdowns to Jeanty, and on the season, they're averaging a touchdown and a half allowed per game. In 4 games, they've given up 6 to opposing running backs. So you have to start JCM. I think the touchdown is a lock. And if he scores 2, it wouldn't shock me. I think he's a clear must start in week 6. At RB16, though, I think we're dropping down a slight tier. And these are still RB2s in the top 20. I would start them, but maybe you have enough depth where you picked up JCM and Dowdle, and now you're benching them. There is a chance, but odds are they're in the lineup. At 16, we got Travis Etienne versus the Seahawks. And the Chiefs were great at stopping the run last year. They looked just as good in week 5. So I think the drop in production was mainly Chiefs related. I think it was more game plan specific. I'm not going to panic on Etienne. He's still averaging 97 yards per game on the season. Last week it was less than 60 with no touchdown. It wasn't a very good start, but I would continue to trust him. I think against Seattle, we just saw them look pretty miserable on defense. Against Baker, Rachaad had 2 touchdowns. I think they will go back to Etienne. And at home, with the Seahawks traveling all the way across the country for an early window game, I think Etienne can step up. I think he's a high-end RB2, very trustworthy floor. Last week was a slight concern, but Bashal Tutin has been fading, and I think the touchdown vulturing is not going to happen too often. It's not every week where Trevor Lawrence will score 2 rushing touchdowns. I will still continue to start Travis Etienne if I have him. At 17, I would also keep starting J.K. Dobbins if I have him. Dobbins is cemented into the lineup, in my opinion. He's such a high floor play, and the Broncos have a good offense, so expecting that touchdown to hit is a relatively reasonable bet to make. 85 yards per game from him on average this year. And despite Sean Payton's running backs never really cracking 100 yards other than 2 weeks ago against Cincinnati, the floor is just so safe with Dobbins. It looks like RJ Harvey is clearly behind him on the depth chart, but they are facing a bad team similar to the Bengals. Maybe they showcase Harvey a bit, but in general, I still trust Dobbins to be the main focal point of the offense. He has clearly earned your trust. He's a top 20 play, I believe, every week. Maybe not top 12 ever, but still top 20. In terms of floor, it's hard to find a safer option. At 18, we have Breece Hall versus Denver, who's also a very safe play, but only a floor play. He has still no touchdowns on the season. We brought it up last week. The upside is capped. And even though he had 155 yards from scrimmage against the Cowboys, he still did not find the end zone. That's just the only problem. But with Braylon Allen going down, I don't worry about Isaiah Davis. I only worry about Fields. At some point, the touchdowns will hit. So it's a decent bet to make. I think from a floor standpoint, Breece Hall is guaranteeing you about 10 points. He's averaging 100 yards per game from scrimmage. And I do trust the floor. I just don't know if that touchdown is ever going to hit at a reliable rate. If it happens, you're going to be ecstatic. It makes him bust-proof that he can give you 10 points without a touchdown every week. But without it, you just don't have that elite ceiling. And that's why I'd rather bet on guys like JCM or Rico Dowdle. I think Etienne and Dobbins have higher touchdown upside as well. So you guarantee 10 points with Breece Hall, but you do not guarantee 13 plus. He's fine to keep trusting, but until he finds the end zone, he just doesn't have that elite upside. Bust-proof, but capped ceiling for sure. At 19, I'm still going to start Kenneth Walker III at Jacksonville. It's not the worst matchup possible, but it is bottom 11, so not great. And the committee he's in is just so annoying. Zach Charbonnet's usage is really the only problem, because last week, Walker was hyper efficient. He had 85 yards on only 10 rush attempts, but then 1 reception for no yards. He had 9 fantasy points despite averaging 8.5 yards per carry. That is insane. What a bummer from Walker, because it's now 4 games this season where Charbonnet's been healthy and Charbs has vultured him in 3 of those matchups. The only game where Walker scored and Charbonnet was healthy, Charbonnet did miss the next week. He came out of it pretty banged up. So I just don't see the true upside with Walker, even though he's super talented. It's just too much of a committee. And Charbonnet is so legit. I just don't see it changing. Charbonnet was a second-round pick, and in his senior year at UCLA, he averaged 168 yards from scrimmage per game. Charbonnet was fantastic in college. So it just sucks that that's his backup. Charbonnet's too good to not factor in. And if we had Walker on literally like any other team in the league, he'd probably be a clear top 12 running back. He is that talented where he should be that good. But the Seahawks just don't use him enough. It's very frustrating. And last week, the passing game usage fell away. It's just not what you expected. It's really a bummer in Seattle with Walker. So maybe I'm actually ranking them incorrectly. If you're giving me a touchdown more likely for Charbs, then Walker does not have the same ceiling. But I think he has a higher floor. In general, I still view him as the RB1 in Seattle. And although he is capped, we only have 2 teams on bye, but I do think Walker is a top 20 play against Jacksonville. There's a lot of injuries at the position at this moment. Then the last player in this tier at RB20, I have Michael Carter at Indianapolis. And Carter is definitely the workhorse running back you want in Arizona. DeMercado will be in the doghouse, if not this week, but indefinitely. And Trey Benson and Connor are both on IR. Benson will come back, but not for now. You want Michael Carter. Last week he had 23 touches, 18 carries, 5 targets, 5 receptions, only 73 yards on that level volume. That's not impressive, but so much efficiency. You can trust the floor. And then he also scored a touchdown. So technically he has higher upside than both Breece Hall and Kenneth Walker, but to pretend like he's more talented would be a lie. So I could definitely see him giving you less than 50 yards, but I do think a touchdown is a relatively safe bet to make. He's going to lock up 20 plus touches because in week 18 last year, when Connor and Benson were out as well, that's what he did. He had 21 touches, 17 on the ground, 4 targets, 4 catches, and a touchdown. That's kind of what you're going to expect. About 20 touches per game. And in this offense, touchdowns rarely go to Trey McBride. They usually go to the running back. I would expect a touchdown for Michael Carter more weeks than not when he's the starter. So as long as Benson remains on IR, Michael Carter has a top 20 floor thanks to the volume. I would start him against the Colts. There is no concern about Emari Demercado. At 21, I think we're dropping down a tier, and these are my favorite flex plays of the week. This group of 5, I think, is the safest bet to make for just over 10 points. But will they go over 12? I'm not sure. They're a bit touchdown dependent, and some of their matchups are kind of difficult. But similar to Michael Carter, the argument for starting Swift is the same. The volume is just so locked in, and perhaps the bye week will change things. I don't expect Kyle Monangai, though, to all of a sudden be a big factor. So on the season, DeAndre Swift is averaging 17.3 touches per game, and although he's only giving you about 68 yards per game, I still think he's the safest bet to score a touchdown other than Rome Odunze. I think it'll happen in this offense. It's pretty random, but I trust Swift in this matchup. I think the volume will carry you, the floor will be high, and I think the touchdown is relatively 50-50. The Chargers running backs got injured last week. They did not score a touchdown, but the Commanders had given up 3 rushing touchdowns in the previous 3 games before last week. And if you remove week 1 against the Giants, they're actually really vulnerable. 133 total yards from scrimmage per game in their last 4 weeks against the running back position. So assuming 80% of the touches go to Swift, I expect him to give you at least 80 yards from scrimmage. The floor, I think, is bust-proof, and I think he'll also offer like 3 catches. I think he has a decent shot at a touchdown. So not the safest upside swing, but a very safe floor play. At RB21, I'd probably start Swift as a flex play if I had him. At 22, I also consider Montgomery a very safe flex play. The only problem is the usage is not elite. It has fallen off a bit this year, and last week was not repeatable. He's not going to be throwing a passing touchdown every week. Against Cincinnati, that's where he grew up. They wanted to showcase him, and the Bengals matchup is so elite. He showed out with 17 fantasy points. But I could see it falling back down to earth like it did 2 weeks ago after the Ravens game. He was terrible in week 4. The Chiefs have given up some touchdowns this year, but otherwise running backs are starting to be worth fading against Kansas City. And odds are the Lions pivot back to Gibbs as the focal point. So I'm only going to start Gibbs with confidence. Montgomery is mainly a touchdown dependent flex play, but in Detroit, there's always upside. There's always a chance for multiple scores. As a top 25 option, I would start him. At 23, I have Cam Skattebo versus Philadelphia, and he wasn't as good as I thought last week, but the volume was there, and sadly, it probably comes away from him this week because Tyrone Tracy has returned to practice. He was limited on Friday and in Monday's walkthrough, and I think odds are Tracy is going to be back on the field for Thursday Night Football. So if that's the case, Tracy was the starter to start the season, and I don't know what the touch split will look like in New York. I think Skattebo will be the guy, especially given Tracy's probably not 100% in his first week back. They probably ramp him up, but I just don't know what the volume will look like for Skattebo with Tracy coming back. So it could be a big problem. Tracy will factor in on the goal line most likely, and so does Jackson Dart. I don't know if a touchdown is a safe bet for Skattebo, but he is their most effective pass catcher. In my opinion, he's their best weapon on the field, their most talented offensive playmaker, and I do think they should use him a lot, but will they? I don't know for a fact. It might be a 50-50 committee, and if that's the case, there's not that many touchdowns to go around in the Giants offense. So I'm pumping the brakes, tempering expectations. Last week, I had a lot more confidence, but it was because he was the workhorse, and now with that not guaranteed, I just don't feel that confident in ranking him top 20. So if you have the depth, you can definitely bench Skattebo for some better options. The Eagles matchup has been an upgrade this season, but it's hard to believe that's actually that accurate. They were so elite at stopping running backs last year. With Tracy factoring in, I'd rather not endorse Skattebo as a must start, but some high upside. If he finds the end zone, he will pay off. I hope it works out. And maybe there is the Saquon narrative for the Giants. Hey, look at our new running back replacement. Maybe it wasn't as stupid to move off of Saquon after all. But we all know it was the wrong decision letting him go to the Eagles. That's mainly why they got torched so bad in that front office. But Skattebo should be okay. Maybe not elite, though. At 23, you could do worse. At 24, I'm very tempted to rank Jaylen Warren like almost 10 spots higher, at least 5 spots higher. He had been a top 20 play, but in week 4, he was inactive against the Vikings, and Kenny Gainwell definitely earned a bit more trust. So I could see Gainwell factor in a little bit more as his handcuff, and maybe he's not 100%. While he was limited in Monday's walkthrough practice, he was only operating in individual drills, not with the rest of the team. So I don't know if he's 100%. He may not be active, but reports indicate that had week 4 been a playoff game, Warren would have suited up. His knee injury wouldn't have held him out if it was a more serious game. So in Dublin, he was inactive. I'm not 100% sure he will play against the Browns, but the main reason I'm not ranking him top 20 isn't because of the injury. It's because of the matchup. The Browns are the toughest matchup on paper you can find, giving up less than 14 fantasy points per game to opposing running backs on the other team. So I think the floor is pretty low in this matchup. The Browns are definitely not a good spot. And although Jordan Mason scored a touchdown last week, that's one of only 3 touchdowns allowed on the season by the Browns to running backs. They only give up 3 yards per carry, and they also forced a fumble from both Mason and Xavier Scott. They have a very elite defense. I would not want to be chasing this matchup in general. So a big downgrade. He definitely drops down a full tier because of it. And that's why I think I'd rather go Montgomery, Swift, and even Cam Skattebo. I think Skattebo is healthier, and maybe I'm wrong about the touch split, but the matchup is way better for Skattebo against the Eagles compared to the Browns. So Warren, a bit of a question mark. Not my favorite play this week, but he's been too good this season. The volume has been there. I'd probably still start him if I had him, but this week, just a flex play, not an elite must start. At 25, we got Tony Pollard at Las Vegas, and this is the last player I consider a legit flex play. Everyone else I would be benching. However, there are some minor concerns with his offense. The Titans rarely score touchdowns, and Pollard did find his second touchdown last week, but he also fumbled, and that wasn't encouraging. I was kind of worried about Tyjae coming back to the lineup, but maybe he's not fully healthy or Cam Ward just doesn't trust him. Tyjae did not really eat into Pollard's production. Pollard had the exact same stat line in terms of volume as he did in week 4 when Tyjae was still on IR. So that's encouraging. The volume didn't fall off. It's mainly just this matchup that I'm kind of worried about. The Raiders give up less than 100 yards from scrimmage per game to opposing running backs, but they also give up 4 touchdowns last week and a lot of touchdowns on the season. Even Amir Abdullah found the end zone last week on Las Vegas. So I think the odds for Pollard to find the end zone are pretty high, but if you told me Tyjae starts to vulture him, I wouldn't be that shocked. I don't think he's going to be as productive as Jonathan Taylor was against the Raiders. So not a safe play, just a floor play. And now that Tyjae's back, he's not as much of a workhorse. Give me Pollard as a decent flex play, but only RB25. I'd rather go Jaylen Warren in a terrible matchup against Cleveland. Beyond this point, I would be benching all these players if I could. I have no confidence in Derrick Henry versus the Rams. Definitely hitting the panic button. You need a touchdown, and even if he gets it, you might not crack 12 points. Last week, he had a touchdown and only 33 yards, 9.3 fantasy points. Was abysmal. So what are you getting in this offense, especially without any receiving usage? The floor is pretty low and the ceiling is capped. I have no confidence. The Rams are, in my opinion, the worst matchup for opposing running backs. They faced McCaffrey and now rank bottom 3, but I think they'll start to drop down closer to the Browns on the list. So I have no confidence in Derrick Henry this week. I have no desire to trust Cooper Rush, and I think they lose by a potential shutout. Honestly, the Rams are going to be very tough to run against. So they only give up 72 rushing yards per game on 3.5 yards per carry. If Henry does not find the end zone, you will get screwed, and there's only been one running back to score on the Rams, and that's McCaffrey. I do not think it's a safe bet at all. I basically view Derrick Henry as identically to Zach Charbonnet this week. He's in the same tier as Charbonnet. I have no confidence in the upside for Henry. It's only name value that forces me to rank him at the top of this tier. I think he's a major liability. He's also 31 years old. His age is definitely showing itself. And if he goes down, you're not going to be that surprised. If he gets hurt and misses the rest of the year, that's been the case with every other 30-year-old running back except Alvin Kamara. It could definitely happen. I would panic on Derrick Henry. I'd be trying to trade him. But at this point, it's only name value that gives him any value at all. At 27, we have Alvin Kamara versus New England, who's also a big trade candidate, in my opinion. I've been telling you to trade him since week 1. And in my opinion, the changing of the guard in New Orleans is going to happen pretty soon. Last week, Kamara had just 8 rush attempts. Kendre Miller had 10. However, he's still relevant in the passing game at a much higher rate. Kamara had 6 targets, caught 4 for 28. Kendre Miller only had 1 target for 8 yards. So it's still favoring him in that department, but since week 1, Kamara has not found the end zone. In week 4, he was vultured by Kendre, and if he gets vultured again, I'm going to start ranking Kendre Miller above Alvin Kamara. But because of the PPR value, I'm going to stick with Kamara ranked higher. But on paper, this Patriots matchup is a big fade. They limited James Cook heavily last week, and I don't think a touchdown is a safe bet ever to bet on for the Saints. I think the upside is pretty capped for Kamara. He's just a low-end flex play, and this week I'd rather bench him. A bottom 5 matchup is not one I want to be chasing in general. So I think Kendre is just a major problem for Kamara's usage. I have no desire to be trusting him, and he's just a floor play. I don't think he's a good start. I personally want my Chargers to trade for him. I think the Saints want to move off of him. Structurally, it doesn't make sense to hold on for much longer. He'll walk in free agency, and they should get something before he goes down with an injury. He's 30 years old. It's not a safe bet. So I would like to see him on a contender. I would like to see him on a different team, but the trade deadline is week 9. For now, he remains a Saint, and if that's the case, he is not a top 25 running back. I have no desire to trust him if I don't have to. At 28 and 29, I have both of the Chargers running backs at Miami, who get a top 5 matchup. The Dolphins give up 183 yards from scrimmage per game against opposing running backs. Last week, Dowdle had over 200 yards on the ground. So there's definitely some upside here. The Chargers also want to run the ball, but their offensive line is decimated, so they can't really block. The efficiency is not going to be anywhere near as high as Dowdle had, and I just don't know who's the guy you want. It's a major gamble. I think Kimani Vidal has slightly higher passing game usage, so a bit of a higher ceiling. But if you told me Hassan Haskins was the goal line running back, that's the main value in this backfield, wouldn't shock me. Hassan Haskins was at least on the roster since week 1 as the third stringer. Vidal was on the practice squad, only got upgraded after Najee went down. So Kimani Vidal, not a safe play at all, but they did draft him. There is some potential, and I have seen him catch passes down the field. I do think he'll factor in against the Dolphins here. So I think it's a relative committee. Betting on the touchdowns, a massive gamble. Maybe one of them emerges after this week as the clear workhorse, but I have no idea who that's going to be, and neither are going to average more than 4 yards per carry. I really don't trust the efficiency at all from either guy. So this matchup sadly is wasted on these two players. If Hampton was active, I'd probably rank Hampton above Javonte this week. I think Hampton would be a top 10 play guaranteed. So it's unfortunate, but the injury bug has struck the Chargers yet again, and I just don't know who is the guy to pick up. If I was only picking up one, gun to my head, give me Kimani Vidal, but I don't feel good about it. I think only the passing game volume is why I'd rather start him. But if the touchdown goes to Haskins, that's a pretty decent gamble to make. I have no idea. Sadly, this matchup is the only reason why they're in the top 30. And because it's a committee we've never seen, you can't trust either. Can't start a Chargers running back unless you're forced. Unless you have a bunch of players banged up and there's just no other option. Good luck with the Chargers running back. I think Kimani Vidal is the way to go, but I can't say that definitively. At 30, I have Chase Brown at Green Bay, and damn, to rather go Vidal or Haskins than Chase Brown, what a sad thing that is for Cincinnati. But Chase Brown gets a terrible matchup this week, bottom 5 against Green Bay, and they're coming off a bye. I do not see any upside for this offense. I know they traded for Flacco, but if anything, I think that means fewer running back targets for Chase Brown. Maybe it helps him. Maybe there's more touchdown production, but I just have no desire to trust Chase Brown. He's been so ineffective, averaging like 2 yards per carry is atrocious. So he's on pace for less than 600 scrimmage yards on the season if he plays all 17 games, and not a single touchdown. Where the fuck is the upside? So can't feel good about it. Got to bench Chase Brown. What a sad state of affairs that is for the Bengals. At 31, Kareem Hunt does factor in here, who does have 2 touchdowns last week. He has 3 on the season, and that's 2 more than Isiah Pacheco. He is favored on the goal line, 3 touchdowns to 1, but the volume is not there. It's still a 50-50 committee between him and Pacheco, and technically it's more like 40-40-20. Brashard Smith also continues to expand his workload. So the volume is just not safe to bet on. If you want to take a shot and hope for a touchdown, be my guest. But if you told me my opponent was starting Kareem Hunt in my fantasy matchup this week, I'd feel pretty solid that I'm going to get the win. I'd feel pretty good about that. So I do not trust Kareem Hunt. I know the touchdown production is kind of interesting and maybe worth chasing after, but I just don't want to do it. If you're starting a Chiefs running back, then definitely plug in Kareem Hunt, but the volume isn't even 10 touches per game. I don't think you want to be starting a Chiefs running back. I still think it's way too much of a liability from a volume standpoint to trust. So he's an old guy. If he went down with injury, I wouldn't be shocked, but I do think they trust him the most on the goal line. That's not the worst bet to make, but it's the same thing with Rhamondre Stevenson. Do you really trust Rhamondre in your lineup? He had 2 touchdowns last week, and it baffles me why they keep giving him the ball after he keeps fumbling, but Mike Vrabel is stubborn as an ox. So I think that role is going to keep being maintained for Rhamondre. It shocks me that they're not using TreVeyon. Even with Antonio Gibson going down, they still went back to Rhamondre. They just have to. I guess it's the contract they have him under. Like, if they move off of him, it's pretty sad. They pay him a lot. So I think that's why. but he's not a safe play. If he fumbles again multiple times, you're not going to be shocked at all. At some point, I do think TreVeyon will get the touches. But for now, I got to keep ranking Rhamondre much higher. Rhamondre at RB32, though, is hyper touchdown dependent, and his efficiency is terrible. I don't trust him against the Saints. No, thank you. I'm not trying to start Rhamondre Stevenson. If he scores another 2 touchdowns, then it worked out for you. I think you get lucky. I'm not going to start him. But at 32, I suppose you could do worse. At 33, the last player in this tier who I have in the same tier as Derrick Henry is Zach Charbonnet. Touchdown dependent. He's such a thorn in Walker's side, but he's actually a pretty good bet to score a touchdown. He's only played 4 games and has 3 touchdowns on the season. But in every game, he has pretty low volume, and he's offering less than 50 yards in every matchup. So even when he scores a touchdown, he's giving you 10.7, 11.4, and 11.3 points. It's not that good. It's capped at under 12 points. So the volume just isn't there. We need Walker to go down to feel like a running back in Seattle is worth starting. And until Charbonnet goes down, I can't really trust Walker that much either. But Walker has been much more effective in terms of yards per carry numbers, so I still would rather start Walker. But if you told me I'm ranking them incorrectly and Charbonnet has more value this week, I wouldn't be that surprised. But I think he has no floor. Without the touchdown, you will get totally burned. So that's why he's 2 tiers lower than Charbonnet in the rankings. I don't think I would start him, but if he told me he found the end zone and give you another 11 fantasy points, wouldn't surprise me. You got to be desperate, though, to trust him. Beyond this point, I'm definitely benching every player, no doubt about it. And RJ Harvey does come in at 34, and you're hoping this is a game similar to the Bengals game where the opponent is just so bad, Sean Payton is willing to play with his food and showcase the rookie. Against the Eagles, that was not the case. It went back to Dobbins in a big way, so not going to trust Harvey, very touchdown dependent. But if you told me he had another big blow-up game against the Jets, wouldn't shock me. The Jets are trash. So Harvey in the top 35, but not worth starting. It's just not safe enough. He has upside long-term, but until Dobbins goes down, I doubt you ever trust him in your lineup. At 35, I think Tyler Algier will factor in against the Bills. They definitely want to keep Josh Allen off of the field, and they will run the ball a lot against the Bills. The Bills have been pretty bad at stopping the run. So interestingly, Algier is kind of in the same equation as Charbonnet. He has 2 touchdowns in 4 games this season, and in both of the games where he has scored, he also has 16 carries. They actually do use Algier quite a bit. He doesn't catch passes. Bijan is definitely the guy, but it's relatively a decent committee to bet on. So if he finds Pater, you'll be happy. If he doesn't, you'll get screwed. And he's definitely a boom bust candidate. The ceiling is not elite, so it's not that worth it. If he even scores a touchdown, I would pass. But if he does and he gives you 14 fantasy points with like 60, 70 yards, it wouldn't shock me. It is a top 11 matchup in terms of fantasy points. So you could do worse, but boy, you got to be desperate to start Algier. And I think Kendre Miller is still in that desperation territory, but he is rising. His workload is increasing. And last week he had more rush attempts than Alvin Kamara, but nowhere near as many targets. That is the problem for him. In PPR, he has no value, and he is touchdown dependent. In New Orleans, there are very few touchdowns to go around. So not going to start him, but I do think he is definitely worth a roster spot. Alvin Kamara is 30 years old, and if you told me they traded him before the deadline, that definitely could happen. So it's not just injury that would lead to Kendre becoming the workhorse. It's also a possible trade outcome. For now, you can't start Miller, but against the Patriots, it's a bad matchup. I wouldn't expect a touchdown. I would definitely hold on to him. He's a must-roster handcuff, but if he scores a touchdown, if he vultures Kamara again, I'd rather have him straight up than Kamara rest of season. For now, I'm not going to rank him that way, but at RB36, you could do worse. Definitely worth a bench stash as Kamara gets older every day. Number 37 is TreVeyon Henderson at New Orleans, and his time is coming. Just like Kendre, at some point, it will be his backfield, but just not yet. The time is not quite there yet. With Antonio Gibson going down, though, this backfield is going to be more of a 50-50 committee. It's not a 3-headed monster anymore. So if Rhamondre fumbles again, then Henderson will have the green light. But until that happens, I just can't trust him. Even though he was more effective than Rhamondre, he wasn't amazing against the Bills, and then he also did not get those goal line touches. That's what's most valuable. The touchdowns are critical in New England, and if they go to Rhamondre, you just can't start TreVeyon with confidence. So at some point, I will believe he is the guy you need, but for now, he's just a bench stash. It's unfortunate, and Vrabel's getting annoying, but for now, I can't start TreVeyon Henderson. I also don't think you can start Kenny Gainwell against the Cleveland Browns. He definitely earned more volume after playing so well without Jaylen Warren, but the Browns are the worst matchup on paper, and if Warren is healthy, I don't see more than 10 touches for Kenny Gainwell. So there is some upside, but very touchdown dependent. Not going to trust him. Just a bench stash handcuff, similar to TreVeyon Henderson. At 39, Tyrone Tracy is questionable. He was limited in practice on Friday and Monday, and I do think on Thursday he will suit up. So that's going to be a bummer for Skattebo, but maybe Tracy is actually going to retain his starting job when he gets back on the field. I wouldn't bet on it, but if you told me it's like a 55-45 split in favor of Skattebo, it's really close, I also wouldn't be surprised. I think Tracy is still going to factor in heavily in this backfield. So needs a touchdown, not a safe bet. The Eagles are an upgrade on paper this season, but at some point I do think Vic Fangio's defense will wake up and be much more effective. So not dying to trust Tracy, still worth a roster spot, but not worth starting in your lineup. At 40, Isiah Pacheco starting to fade. The volume is still kind of evenly split with him and Kareem Hunt, but Kareem Hunt now has 2 more touchdowns than Pacheco on the year. So maybe it's going to flip-flop every week, and this week it goes back to Pacheco like it did in week 4. But given it's 3-1 in favor of Kareem Hunt, I'm not going to trust Pacheco. The volume isn't high enough for either of them. I still don't even want to start Kareem Hunt. I just think there's more touchdown upside there. And without that for Pacheco, you will get fucked. So against Detroit, no thanks. It's not the easiest matchup. They give up less than 100 yards from scrimmage to the position every week. The Lions rank bottom 10 in terms of matchups. So no thanks with Pacheco. Definitely don't trust the workload. And then at 41, I'll give Blake Corum one last week, ranked in this tier. 41, though, I'm definitely not starting him. I think he's more likely in the doghouse completely after the fumble last week. They had no faith in going back to him. Even though Kyren also fumbled, they stuck with Kyren and kept Corum on the bench. So that is a big problem. I was worried about his role entering last week, but with the fumble, I think that's going to fade away for a while. I don't think you can trust him until after the week 8 bye when his role might come back to him. But until then, not going to bet on him at all. He's an elite handcuff if Kyren goes down. For now, Jarquez Hunter is not a factor whatsoever. But with the fumble, you got to be panicked a bit. Corum is not going to get 10 touches. Most likely, he didn't see the ball once after the fumble. So no thanks there. And then I'll rank the top 50 as I always do, just to tell you who I think is worth rostering this week, but not worth starting. Raheem Mostert actually gets a great matchup against Tennessee, so I could see them lean on the run. I don't think I would pick him up though, but I do think this week he does have like 5-6 point value. If he finds the end zone, I wouldn't be that shocked. The Titans are terrible at defending the run. At 43, we have Bashal Tutin versus Seattle, starting to fade, but still has legit touchdown chances every game. I could see him vulture ETN yet again, but without it, you will get screwed. No thanks on Bashal Tutin. At 44, we have Brashard Smith versus Detroit, who's getting more work every single week, but not enough to trust yet. If he overtakes Pacheco soon, wouldn't be surprised at all. 45, Jerome Ford at Pittsburgh does factor in, still getting some work in the Browns' backfield. And that team does use the running back a lot, especially extra with Dylan Gabriel at quarterback. So somewhat relevant, but not enough behind Quinshon. I wouldn't trust him. And then Tyjae Spears might not be fully healthy, but didn't get much work last week. I only want to give it one more week of patience on Tyjae. If he doesn't see more than 8 touches this week, I would drop him with confidence. Odds are you probably already did that. At 47, Isaiah Davis of the Jets. You have to be praying for a vulture touchdown. It's possible, but not worth betting on. And then the last 3 have completely unstartable value. Definitely can't trust them, but they also need to be rostered as the most elite handcuffs if the starter goes down. Brian Robinson Jr. in San Francisco would be a top 12 running back without McCaffrey. Will Shipley would also be top 15 without Saquon. And then Ray Davis would also be top 15 without James Cook. Those offenses are too high scoring. And if the running backs go down, you need them on your team. They are viable handcuffs to roster despite no value to start in fantasy. So that's it for my rankings. These are the top 41 at the position this week. And I think the elite top 4 tier is a no-brainer. I put Jacobs in there because the Bengals matchup is the best of the best. Jacobs, I think, will score not just 1, but 2 touchdowns against the Bengals. 5 through 9, a very safe top 10 tier. And I think there's also multiple touchdown upside for all of them. They all have very good matchups. Love Jeanty against Tennessee this week. A potential 3 touchdown game again. And then Gibbs always in your lineup. Kyren has an elite matchup against Baltimore. Corum is in the doghouse. Javonte has been top 10 this season, so got to keep starting him. And without Bucky Irving and Evans, betting on the Bucs offense with Rachaad White is a no-brainer. But Saquon has been touchdown dependent. He's been tied with Quinshon Judkins in terms of points per game this season, so they're tied at 10 and 11. And then Achane, not the best matchup for him this week, but still a must start. Same applies with James Cook. Very difficult matchup against the Falcons. Dowdle in a revenge spot gets an elite matchup. So does JCM. They're must starts in the top 15. And then the safe RB2s would be ETN, Dobbins, and Breece Hall. They've been averaging very high production this season. Decent touchdown odds with the exception of Breece Hall. And then Walker gets vultured, but is still very productive and efficient. Michael Carter gets way too much volume to fade. I think he finds the end zone. And then the best flex plays would be Swift getting a ton of volume, Montgomery with decent touchdown odds, Skattebo in a likely committee, not as good, but a good matchup against the Eagles. Warren kind of banged up in the toughest matchup, not the best play. And then Pollard pretty touchdown dependent, but Vegas does give up a lot of touchdowns. So those are the running backs I would starting with Derrick Henry, however, at 26. I would definitely bench these players. I have no confidence. Hyper touchdown dependent, and I don't know what I'm going to get. Henry is not safe at all. Neither is Kamara at this stage of his career. Kendre is factoring in a lot. Kimani and Haskins have a great matchup against the Dolphins, but have no idea who's the guy you need. Chase Brown's been ass, so no thanks there. Kareem Hunt, hyper touchdown dependent, but just like Rhamondre, needs touchdowns. Without it, you will get screwed. And Charbonnet, also very touchdown dependent as a backup. That is probably the last guy I would consider, but maybe you're super desperate. Maybe you lost Hampton this week and you have to take a swing on RJ Harvey, Algier, Kendre, TreVeyon, Kenny Gainwell, Tyrone Tracy, Pacheco, and Blake Corum. They are relevant in their respective offenses, but without a touchdown, you are not going to crack 6 or 7 points. So that's it for the ranks this week. Good luck. If you have any questions, let me know in the comment section below. And tomorrow we'll rank wide receivers. I'm going to try and go live tonight if I'm not too tired, if it's not too late, for waiver wire pickups. Look for that. Ring the notification bell if you don't want to miss out. I'll see you next time. My name's Adam Riancho, and thank you for watching. Nice and blunt.